I think this idea that writing can be a mind expanding agent is it's a really transformative way, I think, of looking at your own potential, what can be unlocked in your brain, the connections that you make, your position in the universe, your smallness and your bigness, the relative size of your peers and colleagues and family and friends and strangers. That is what it can do for you to just be there for yourself.
My name is Francesca Phillips, and you're listening to the Good Space Podcast, a show where we help you find peace and power in work, relationships, and intuition. Have you ever felt conflicted when listening to a podcast episode because you want to take notes on the insights that you're receiving, but at the same time, you're cooking or cleaning or working out and it's not really convenient to do so? Well, we have got you covered. Starting in September, we are going to have a paid membership where after every interview that's released on the Good Space podcast, we will create a one-page PDF of all the greatest insights and takeaways from that episode, as well as action items that you can do to integrate the learnings from that episode. So you can cook, clean, do whatever it is that you like to do while you're listening to a podcast. And then later, you will have the great takeaways and the notes that you need to integrate it into your life. So it's a win-win. You will also get monthly email courses on topics like law of attraction, ego, wealth, manifesting, teaching you ways that you can integrate those principles more into your life. We'll have free iPhone wallpapers, coloring pages with affirmations, as well as community activities like weekly stand-ups, or we could do monthly Q&As. A lot of it is still being built and created with input from the community. So if this sounds awesome to you and there are other things that you would even want to add to it, like please get on our waiting list. Let's chat, join the membership, join the community, because you will also be supporting the Good Space's mission, which is to help people get the tools they need to feel peace in their life. So there's so much goodness that comes from this. Go to the show notes, sign up for our waiting list, and let's go. Welcome to the Good Space Podcast. Today, we are going to have a very special writer on the show. Her name is Rachel Jepsen. She's a nonfiction editor, writer, and dog owner living in the Midwest. And we love dogs here at the Good Space, or at least I love dogs. So hopefully a lot of my listeners do too. They're the best. She's the executive editor at Every, a digital subscription publication focused on entrepreneurship, productivity, internet culture, technology, leadership, and more. She writes The Long Conversation, a newsletter on writing and editing with over 5,500 subscribers and growing, because I am definitely one of those subscribers and she's amazing. And an interesting fact is that The Long Conversation started as a podcast. So Rachel, thank you for coming on the show today.
It's a delight. Thank you so much for having me.
Seriously, it's so funny how in the creative community, you just tend to stumble upon each other's work and when it's inspiring and you just reach out. And I'm so glad that you responded, because sometimes you never know, right?
Totally. It's almost especially finding stuff on the internet, it's you see it when you're ready for it. Sometimes I love that you came to The Long Conversation when you were working on launching your own newsletter. That's so just serendipitous and awesome. Love it.
It was definitely meant to be. And the article that just rocked my world was Chaotic Good. And it was basically talking about, for those who haven't read it yet, it's about shame-free writing. And you talk about how chaos is necessary to create something. And as someone, me, who's a perfectionist, it's so hard for me sometimes to let things go or to not start until things feel perfect or I feel inspired. What inspired you to write that, and where did those thoughts come from?
What a great question. The reason that I wanted to work on the chaotic good piece, that really came from my relationships with my writers. It's funny, Francesca, to hear you introduce me as a writer, because I really do consider myself an editor first. And sort of so much of the understanding I have of what a lot of the challenges are for folks trying to do this professionally and consistently comes from the conversations that I have with the people that I work with and listening to their challenges and how helping them as I can to address them and to sort of mitigate some of the difficulties, find inspiration. And one of the concerns that just comes up so much of the time is the one that you share, which is, I need this to be perfect. I need it to be good. I need it to be right. And that really stifles us from beginning so much of the time. The vast majority, I think, of the times that it's difficult to get started is really coming from that place of perfectionism. And I don't always like to use the word perfectionism because I think it puts a little bit of like, you have a flaw, like this is something that you have this, you suffer from perfectionism, which I think it's much more of a pattern of behavior that can be addressed by trying new behaviors. Rather than it being a sort of quality within you. So I think rather than, sort of thinking about it that way, if we try different methods of getting started, giving us a specific task to do instead of sort of talking about this, stop caring so much or just get started and work it out later on. Like those things aren't as helpful as giving people a really specific place to start. While I want to help people embrace the idea of starting in a chaotic place, I think that can really help us discover what it is that we want to say and how we want to say it. The reason that I put it in the context of sort of giving people really specific places to start and sort of specific tasks is because you have to combine that idea, that theory, it's chaos theory, that, that's where creativity comes out of a place of chaos. You have to also give people prompts. Start here, start with this random word, something like this, that sort of, I always talk about prompts being the thing that puts gas in your creative tank, but then you're still the driver. So I like to sort of combine methods like that and have them be specific and actionable in that way. And I find that it's been helpful for the people that I work with.
Really great. And I actually want to read the quote that I pulled that I really, really liked about chaos. You said, chaos isn't only necessary to create anything. Harnessing chaos is possible in our ultimate creative state. Self-editing is part of the creative process, but the initial idea, the first spark of truth that ignites a new piece of writing and fuels the remainder of the process, is born out of chaos, just like the universe. So I'm assuming you had to work your way through this, right? Like you had to figure this out for yourself as a writer.
So yes, of course. My experience as a writer, I have a background, I have a master's in poetry, which is kind of out of left field sometimes for people to hear that. But a lot, I talked about this a little bit more in sort of my methodology and how I gather ideas and how I sort of get started in my last piece, which was really the example that I used that I talked about in the last essay, which was about sort of how writing can help us deal just with difficult emotional states and trauma, which is something that we can talk about here if you'd like. One of the specific methods that I used to get through my degree and write my thesis was to gather bits of randomness. Misheard things, overheard things, typos in magazines I would write down if I found them. Stuff that just felt like a little off and a little flawed. I would be able, sort of when you're walking around or you're sitting on the bus and you've overheard a conversation and you've gotten it wrong. That's stuff that I write down. And I start from that point. I have a million of these tiny little, pocket notebooks where I recorded basically just flaws that I would see, stuff that didn't quite make sense, stuff that was off or taken out of context. I would deliberately take things out of context. And then I revisit that sort of notebook full of chaos to help me get started. I'll find whatever sparks my interest, write it down or type it up and start from there. So it was a deliberate part, that sort of harnessing of that chaos. It was really a method for me. It was a specific strategy when I was working in that genre. And I find that the different ways that we can sort of strategize around chaos and flaw specifically, I think those are really related. They can help us deal also with this idea that things need to start in a perfect place in order to continue in one, which as an intellectual, you can see that that's crazy. Or sorry, not to use that word, not to use that stigmatizing language. Everything has to start from a different place then it ends up. There's something so obvious to that. And I think sort of once you lay down those truths and commit yourself to them, it becomes easier to practice them. So I feel lucky that I've been able to sort of see how that strategy has worked for me in my own creative process. But it is a consistent like acceptance of that, I think, difficult truth. And the reason I think it's difficult is because it takes quite a bit of faith in yourself and in the process. So that fear of like, well, the first thing that I have sort of put down isn't good. The only way to keep going with that is to trust that it will be eventually. Gosh, that sounds really hard, doesn't it? Sounds really hard. And I think I'll say one other thing about this. I learned a lot about sort of the chaos state or the madman theory of the first draft of writing, also as a teacher in my capacity teaching undergraduates at the University of Montana. And that was such a difficult place for them to begin drafting for different reasons. For students, and I think this is true for some writers, and I'd be very curious to hear from you on this, the thought needs to be fully formed before it's put down, because making something corporeal is really scary. It's like a challenge. It's like a mirror all of a sudden. When it's just chaotic thoughts in your head and you're not sure what you think yet, it's a lot less scary. But once you've sort of taken something you know is kind of wrong and written it down or given it to somebody else, well, now it's part of how people perceive you. At least that's how we think about it. And so that becomes another sort of blocker to begin.
There's so much that you said I just want to like grab onto and like unpack.
I'm in a talking mood today.
Well, first of all, anyone that's listening, I feel like these concepts and principles can apply to any creative work, whether you want to build a business, whether you want to paint or work out or whatever. Like everything you're saying is so universally true. It like gives me chills. But then as far as like having a fully formed thought in your mind before putting it down, I think maybe at some point I struggled with that, but I do daily pages every day from the Artist Way, where you just write 3 pages stream of consciousness. And I feel like that has very much helped me unclog that in myself. Like it's okay to just write things down, get them out, and then you could grab things that stick or that you want to expand upon. So there was something else that you said that really stood out to me is, when you talked about basically it's judgment, right? Like the reason people don't want to put it down is because it's self-judgment. We live in a judgmental world. So it's almost like allowing yourself to just write something and not having to qualify it, to put value on it, to not judge it. And when we can remove that, then we might feel safer with ourselves. And I feel like that's what I've been learning so much is I need to feel safe with myself.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I think while a lot of what I'm talking about here in sort of the creative process is applicable in a lot of fields, I think there's something specific about writing that people can harness no matter what field they're in the way that you have, which is this journaling. And I think this idea of like journaling to sort of get through these thoughts of self-judgment, I think there are similar things can happen when you sort of embrace the chaos theory of the first draft. But what's really profound about being able to do that, no matter if you consider yourself a writer or not, if you just journal, but you're a banker during the day, whatever, the journal itself is a mind expanding agent. And what you say about being less judgmental of yourself, the more you do that, the more you journal, think about how that can impact the way that you see other people's struggles as well. It is a tool for helping us become more compassionate. So I think that's another way of getting over or sort of adjusting that kind of perfectionism that a lot of us have is, would you have the same kind of judgment about somebody else? What if you were the stranger or you were the friend? Would you tell them, this has to be correct, or I'm not going to give it any of my time to help you figure out what it is that you think or what the thesis is? If you are that kind of person and you treat other people that way, good luck. But I think that there's so much too about how journaling can help us become more compassionate, not just for ourselves, but for other people, because of the way that it sort of lays out the first draft of consciousness, of ideation. And there are other elements of that as well that we can discuss, but just curious what you think about that.
I mean, I journal every day, and, I do the 3 pages stream of consciousness, but now the way I guide it is I on the cover of my journal, this is actually from Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and I wanted to test it out, and it's been working really well, but I'll have a list of things that I've accomplished in the last 90 days. And then the things that I want to work towards in the, next 90 days. And reading that and journaling has just opened up so much within me. But before I did that, I definitely journaled to process emotions. What I now see as trauma, I honestly didn't recognize what trauma was until like this year or last year. I was like, oh, that happened because I was experiencing a trigger response and I had no idea. And so I think it's changed as my needs have changed. And so I am thinking about someone listening who maybe they are struggling with something, or maybe they're in a transition point in their life. So how would you recommend that they start or approach journaling to help them work through something?
What a great question. Thank you for asking. And I think your own perspective here is incredibly valuable, because this isn't just an idea. This is something that people do. It's also something that people study. Journaling can help us process and, first of all, as you put it, recognize trauma. You sort of have the ability to, well, let me say this differently. With trauma, and I think there's a lot of, misunderstanding about what that terminology means. I want to say that, this is where I want to talk about this as if this is something that a lot of people experience. And I think self-judgment and doubt and confusion and feelings of isolation and emptiness, misunderstandings about our own behavior, putting up walls. These are things that all people experience regardless of specific events in their past. So I just want to say that, because I think that this is applicable for all of us to help us sort of recognize what we have been through and what's been effective for us and what's contributed to our behavior and difficulties or successes in our relationships. So the way that journaling can reveal those things to you, it's not always about asking yourself a specific question or doing a specific exercise. I think the morning pages, or the sort of stream of consciousness writing, that is suggested that you do as early as possible upon waking, but it can happen at any time during the day. What you're doing is more than even examining, right? Because you're not examining, you're laying out how you're feeling now. And what that ends up doing over time, I think, as we sort of reach back and sort of start to think this, I'm having this memory, maybe this feeling that I'm having is there's something in my head right now. There's an image that I want to write down. You start to build a sense of what has happened to you. And what the power of that recognition is that it helps us remove or mitigate the effects of self-doubt when it comes to that sort of, why am I like this feeling that we have, that like, why can't I just be different? Or why aren't things easier in this way? It's really hard for us to access what's happened to us in a way that helps us actually understand that we are the result of a lot of different things. I think the other gift of journaling when it comes to understanding and sort of recognizing is all of the voices that you have in your head are part of this. I think it's related to meditation. That's not a practice that works for me, but I've heard that this really does reveal sort of a similar kind of realization and then recognition of the many yous within you. And so that sort of conversation that you get to start having, and that sort of, you understand, oh, maybe I'm reacting in this way, or I'm having this emotional response in this part of my body, in this part of myself, in this version. Maybe that version of yourself is your child self, something like that. Just being able to see that play out over time, you can even see your writing style change sometimes. And I think those can be really really profoundly helpful. And again, what I think that can do once we're in a place to understand and sort of see some of this as a tool, I say journaling is can be a mind expanding agent precisely because once you start to be able to see some of that in yourself, you might become more compassionate about what other people are dealing with. My father always said when I was growing up, everyone's walking wounded. I think, there's a lot of other ways to phrase that, but that's the one that I grew up with. And I hold on to that today, and it informs my practice.
That's so wise. How neat that your dad shared that with you. And I'm sure that's affected like everything you've done, because I know that you're so much about inclusivity and voice and like knowing what your voice is and helping others find their voice. And I feel like journaling can help you do that, to just hear yourself and to feel like you have a safe space to like process or put things out there that maybe you're not comfortable in your environment sharing outside of, pen and paper or like typing it on the computer.
Absolutely. It's self-affirmative. I exist. In that way, there's a whole other element of this. And again, I think I mentioned that, the sort of content itself isn't always the most relevant thing. What you're writing, I think can be some anxiety about journaling. Like, did I get it all down? Like, did I, did I tell it like it really is? What did I forget or misremember? And I know I have a lot of anxiety about that. That's where my sort of difficulties and blockers lie when it comes to writing. But I think a piece of this that often gets missed, and I've talked about this on the Long Conversation podcast in the past, is the physical act of doing so. What's your experience with that? Like, if you want to share anything about sort of your practice physically, I'd be so curious to hear.
Wait, because now I'm like, what do you do? Because I mean, honestly, I've switched over the years from doing digital and then notebook, because for a while I'm like, where am I going to keep all these notebooks?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I just keep getting them piled up and I'm just like, what do other people do? Like, I don't know if I handwrite. Like, to me, it's more therapeutic to handwrite, but I usually am either on the couch or like I lay on my stomach on my bed and just have my head next to it. And then I just write and let it go.
Yeah.
But usually I'm like cozy and comfortable, and I try to like, is that what you're asking? Like, is that what you mean? Okay.
Yes.
Cause I've never had someone ask that. So it's very interesting, but yeah, I'm usually very cozy. And before I would do 750words.com and I would just like type everything in, and then it tells you like what the main emotion was, like what tense you're writing in. And it's really cool to see that. And that actually adds that self-aware element even more. But then after a while, I just realized, this isn't giving me the satisfaction as much as writing by hand. And so I've gone back to that, and that's kind of what I stuck with.
Have you reflected much on the why behind that? That sort of, you said it felt more, or it was more therapeutic to do longhand.
Honestly, I think because I struggle with anxiety a lot of times. And I notice that like if I use my body, or like I do yoga, or like I'm writing, or like something is moving with my body, it helps get that energy out. And then also I have a degree in psychology. So I always kind of like go the psychological route, but I know that there's science behind, hand to paper, like writing your thoughts down and vice versa. And like, I'm sure everyone knows this, that when you're in school, if you write notes by hand, you're more apt to like integrate it and like actually soak it in than you would any other way. So I think maybe that's why like it just feels more connected and real, if I had to guess.
Yeah, more connected and real. Yes, the physical process is something that I really encourage people to think about more. I think more than the content, the process itself and the physical act is part of the healing, particularly for those of us who use journaling, which I think is everybody when you think about it, to kind of process and recognize and understand. And then hopefully, yes, I handwrite. Now, I want to just to caveat all of this with, people should do what their bodies are comfortable and capable of doing. And that is always first and foremost going to be the most effective thing, no matter what. A lot of people, it's easier or more accessible to work with a screen and a laptop and a keyboard or another kind of tool. Please, no matter what, it will be helpful. Do what works for your body. for those of us who can access handwriting and journaling and be able to move around in the writing process, I think that it's often just under discussed. And really, as you said, I mean, you had never thought about it before, which is so interesting, because I do think that's where a lot of the healing happens. This isn't just, yes, like handwriting, it slows down your thinking process. So you can sort of be right, like writing is slower than thinking, and handwriting is slower than typing. This is an idea from Robert P. Yagelski, who I interviewed on the Long Conversation podcast about a year ago, who's the author of an incredible book, one of my absolute favorite pieces of academic writing, called Writing as a Way of Being. And that was the first text that I encountered that really taught me about the physical and, crucially, the communal parts of the writing process, and how these can serve together to actually help communities address and deal with trauma, just come together. And, Bessel van der Kolk, the author of The Body Keeps the Score, talks so much about moving together and dancing and singing together and all of this. So these ideas have all become really connected for me. And sort of, I jumped to the communal aspect of this, but the physical process of writing, in the way that it slows down your thinking process, it can slow down your heartbeat. Even just recognizing, like, I am here, I am a body moving, I am capable of actually transforming my thoughts and emotions into these ideas and theories, to have this record of my body. That's really what a journal can be. Like, this is not just a record of my thought process, whatever that is. It's literally something that I created. What an incredible thing to be able to recognize as, people who struggle with feeling present or important or capable or creative, So I think recognizing that and really using that as a tool to help us separate, I think, a little bit also from work part of writing, that I think can also be a blocker for a lot of people. We tend not to do our work, on paper these days, many of us. So I think there's also that element of just, this is separate from what I do to be productive. This is separate from what I do to perform. So having that physical separation, even if it's just moving your computer to a different room, if you choose to, if that's your tool, can just be incredibly effective in sort of changing our mode.
Yes. And you have definitely confirmed to me something that I've always known, that each of us are creative individuals. Like, we have divine spirits that are meant to express themselves, that are meant to create. That there's a reason why creating feels so good. It's because it's in our nature to do it. When I was in Switzerland, my husband and I lived there for a few years because of his job. And I met this writer there who had a writing group. And it's a method that helps people with trauma or difficult situations feel creative, because it gives them a voice, and it's meant for underserved communities, women, other different groups like that. And I was in the group, not from that context, but it was more just, she had a group of people that she wanted to do this group with. And I was changed by it, because she you talked about writing prompts. She gave us prompts that opened up these things inside of me that I was like, wow, I didn't know I could write that. And so I just feel like, in general, having a way to know your voice and to express your voice is so important. And so I know that that's a lot of the work you do, is helping people, like you say on your website, find their voice, understand what they want to say, and say it good. And so I want to know, what does that process entail? What do you do to help people understand their voice, to start using it the way they want to?
Everything we've talked about. I mean, I want to take this moment to talk, to address what you said a little bit about creativity and sort of realizing that this is possible for you. Everybody out there listening or existing in the world who doesn't consider themselves I'm not a full-time writer, or I'm not a writer, or I do writing, whatever. This it's important for you to understand that even people who are professionals struggle calling themselves by these names, because identifying as I'm creative, I'm a writer, those are really difficult because they feel like they have to be accompanied by an action. And so when we don't consistently kind of meet our own expectations about what those things look like, well, then I'm a fraud or I'm a liar. So I'm working with a writer right now, actually. This book will be published later this year by Holloway, a digital publisher. And he is working on a book called Doing Creative rather than Being Creative, where he gives a sort of series of really excellent prompts and sort of different ways of looking at a sort of different sorts of creative problems. And that's really the most important thing, is helping people understand that this isn't doing a bad job at this or having it be hard doesn't have to threaten your identity. So this is a practice. And that's what I always try to emphasize with my writers or with students or people, folks who are newer to a practice or to the idea of writing is, or creativity in general, is that it's a practice. This is just something that you do. It's a process as well. It doesn't have to be, informed by your identity or stand in for it, because those things are then become huge blockers, specifically and particularly when you're trying to understand what your voice is and sort of harness that. So we get really caught up, even professionals, and I want to try this out. This will work. This won't work, blah, blah, blah. We get really nervous about doing something that isn't us, that isn't right, that doesn't, I'm doing scare quotes here, doesn't feel true and correct. And it's again, back to that sort of student's fear of making something that I just want to try it out. But making it corporeal means that it can be threatened, it can be seen, it can be thrown back in our faces. It becomes a mirror in a way that frightens us. But if you start, and so this is something that from students to professionals all experience, this fear of getting it wrong. And the reason that we're afraid of getting it wrong is precisely because it threatens our identity. And so when you start to think or continue to practice this sort of chaos writing and this let me just experiment, throwing stuff at the wall, trying a million things, trying on costumes, doing it like somebody else, writing in a different genre that you're bad at and you know nothing about. These things free us into finding what our direction is, what our voice is. You cannot write a map without going to the place. That's what it would be like to say, this is my voice before trying anything out. Imaginary.
To me, it sounds like creativity in writing is a spiritual practice. And the reason most of us, or at least for me, the reason I in the past have not let myself go there or experiment is because we put those, like you said, identity markers, or I have to be productive, or I have to produce and have an outcome from it. And that's when it really stifles our ability to experiment. When I was a kid, I didn't think about that. I just was I like writing. This sounds fun. Let me just do it. And that was the extent of my thinking around it. And it's almost we have to kind of go back to that. But I think you would consider creativity and writing a spiritual practice, right?
I would, absolutely. It can be. I think as well, what you mentioned, the sort of what you have as a child is access to play. I think play can be a really important part, if you want it to be, if you let it be, of what spirituality can be. And writing can be a place to play. So I think it's very connected to sort of getting back to that place of childhood, which is, I think, a spiritual place. One of the reasons that I love this question is because what all kinds of writing, from journaling to exploring different genres, this is also part of why we read, is because it helps us imagine other ways of being. It helps us imagine other answers to the questions that we've maybe stalled on about our past. It's another reason that writing and journaling can help us process difficult experiences, is because when you have something that's difficult that happens to you, we stop being able to interpret that experience in different ways, right? You get stuck with a really specific memory, when for non-traumatic or, experiences, we adjust them over time. We adjust our perception of them, our memory of them, to suit where we are in life currently. That is regular. It's how we work. It's how memory functions to protect us. So what writing can do, if you have trouble sort of getting out of a specific memory or getting out of a specific mode or attitude, is it can help us explore those other possibilities and other people's experiences, but also other ways of answering the same questions. And for me, I would love to hear if that feels spiritual, like spirituality to you. But to me, it's all about imagination and really valuing the power of imagination. In Milton's Paradise Lost, Milton talks about, Eve is sort of characterized as her godhead is that's what they call her imagination, her willfulness to sort of experience other ways of telling this story that's already been written down for her. In this way, writing can particularly be impactful for women who have often found that their story has already been told for them. So that really, I think, emphasizes the best parts of what religion was supposed to be, which is good storytelling. And it reminds us of sort of why, Eve's ability to imagine her way into a different reality, a reality where a loving partnership was actually more important than her relationship to God, that I think Eve is a writer.
Yeah. So I definitely do think imagination and play 100% is a spiritual act or feeling or part of it, because especially with manifesting. So I noticed that anytime I've manifested more wealth or more good feelings with other people or just relationships, it's always happened when I am enjoying my life. I'm not feeling pressure, or I'm just going with the flow of things. And a lot of that is imagining or playing or just having fun. So much has come to me with ease because of that. And so, yes, I believe that's a huge part of spirituality. And there's probably parts of it that I haven't even tapped yet, but I know that imagination is a huge part of it.
That's beautiful. And what I really like about this is, in your description of how those two ideas connect, it really can involve other people in such a really beautiful way. Like play and imagination. I mean, when you think about being a kid and sort of, I'm going to be a writer, think about the other things that you did that were imaginative, that involved world building with your peers. And this again connects back to The Body Keeps the Score, but also to writing as a way of being, and what Yagelski talks about with even writing separate stories, answering different questions, but physically writing in the space where other people are doing it too, silently. It gives us that same sense of we're kind of building something together. We're playing at this together. It even being in the same room with somebody else doing the same kind of movement with you helps us see them as real. I think that for me is a big part of what spirituality can do. I mean, and you can just call that being a person. But I think that sort of desire to connect to other people and to build community, those are things that if that's the world of spirituality, that if that's what resonates with you, then this communal aspect of these physical things really make that, I think, real and possible and just cool.
It's great that you describe it that way, because I definitely have felt that in the writing group that I was in, and then also yoga. I feel like when I was going to the studio twice a week before COVID, I would see other people improving and it would inspire me to improve. And then we all were on the same energy, like wavelength. And it just like, we built on each other's like energy. And like, it was just a great experience. So it's just so funny. Like, I love how you describe it. You describe these things in ways that I'm like, I haven't thought about it that way. So I appreciate it. So I've actually written down writing as a way of being and the body keeps score. I'm pretty sure I've heard of writing as a way of being, but I've definitely heard of the body keeps score. And so now I'm like, okay, I need to get it. Like, this is clearly a book I need to read. So are there other books that you love or would recommend for us to read?
Oh my God. So many. Oh no, now I'm nervous. I feel like I have to pick the best possible one.
Or even if it's just one you're reading right now, that's totally fine.
Well, I'm gonna answer this question in a way that's convenient for me. If you tend to read in a specific genre, my reading recommendation for everybody is to read in a different genre. Doesn't matter what it is. Go to your local indie bookstore or your library or call them and ask them, I'm interested in getting started in poetry. Like, what just came out that you love or whatever. I really encourage people to lean on their local resources for this, because guess what? Like, if I recommend a book that I love, here's One Big Self by C.D. Wright. This is a great book. It's a book of poetry about prisons. I'm going to say more about that. But if I make that recommendation to you, you're sort of like, okay, I'm going to go off. Like, maybe I liked this person's vibe or what they were about, and I'm going to go check out this book. And then we remain kind of disconnected about it. What becomes possible if you reach out to your local library or you reach out to your local bookstore is you've made a connection with another person in your community. What did they love? Okay, so you now have chosen to rent or buy that book. You get to go back and say, I loved it, I hated it, recommend something else like this, whatever. What I love about this is like, it brings us the wondering what to read next, can bring us into our communities, bring us into new relationships, and establish a new conversation. And I think that's just so much better than Googling, next best in the genre or whatever, top 10 Audible, whatever. That's how people should find what's next, I think.
Wow. That is the coolest answer I have ever heard to that question. Because I usually ask people I interview, hey, what are you reading? But that is like the coolest response. So thank you for that. If there is one thing, if someone only took one thing away from our chat today, what would you want to say to them, or what would it be?
I think this idea that writing can be a mind expanding agent it's a really transformative way, I think, of looking at your own potential, what can be unlocked in your brain, the connections that you make, your position in the universe, your smallness and your bigness, the relative size of your peers and colleagues and family and friends and strangers. That is what it can do for you to just be there for yourself, to show up for yourself on the page every day, can actually end up bringing you again into conversation and connection with other people, into empathy with them, into, more self-love. And I just really encourage people to try to be less afraid of what they might find and more excited.
Oh, I really felt that. Thank you so much, Rachel, for taking time to chat with me today. And I hope we get to do this again soon.
Me too. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Now it's time for an affirmation. I allow myself to play and inspire those around me to do the same. If you found today's tips inspiring or thought-provoking, share it right now on social media and make sure to tag me at Francesca A. Phillips or at Find Your Good Space, and also weigh in the comment section at findyourgoodspace.com. You can find links in the show notes. And if you have a spiritual or mindfulness problem that you want me to unpack on an upcoming The Good Space episode, or an awesome manifesting story you want to share, give my podcast phone line a ring right now at 917-719-0867. Also, don't forget to download my free morning routine guide. It's what helped me reduce my anxiety, increase productivity, and so much more. The link to everything I mentioned is in the show notes. See you soon.